Let's learn some biblical Hebrew. The first thing we need to learn is their version of the alphabet, which they call the aleph-bet. By the way, just like how there are different ways to pronounce things in English depending on where you're from, it's the same thing with Hebrew. An American would say out, a Canadian would say oat, and someone from Britain would say Basically, all that to say that I'm going to be using the Sephardic pronunciation going forward. So the first thing to know about the aleph-bet, they don't write with vowels. Vowel markings, or niqqud, were added later. So while most versions of the Hebrew Bible have the niqqud now, you might still see some that are just the consonants. So let's start with the first letter in the aleph-bet. The first letter is aleph, and it does not make a sound. That's right, aleph does not make a sound. It's sometimes used as a way to introduce a lone vowel if it's at the beginning of a word, but its sound is more closely related to an apostrophe or a guttural stop. An example of this would be Elohim, where because it's at the beginning of the word, it mainly acts as a placeholder for the vowel. However, if you're saying the God, it would be Ha-Elohim, which is one word, but you can hear where that apostrophe is. Next up is bet, which has a peculiarity of its own. You see that little dot in the middle? It's called a dagesh, and that means that it's pronounced with a hard B sound, like bain, which means sun. If you take the dagesh away, it makes the V sound. While there aren't any biblical words that start with vet, there are some that end with it, like av, meaning father. So again, with the dagesh, it makes the B sound, and without the dagesh, it makes the V sound. Next is gimel, which makes the hard G sound. One example is gamal, which means camel. Yeah, gimel's easy. Next is dalet, which makes the D sound. A word that helps me remember dalet is dam, which means blood. And dalet is another easy one. Now the letter hey can do one of two things. If it's at the beginning or middle of the word, it makes the soft H sound. One example is har, which means mountain. But if you ever see hey at the end of the word, it's silent, like the word ata, which means you. Next is vav, or wow. But because we're sticking with the Sephardic pronunciation, we're going to call it vav and pronounce it as such. This letter makes the same sound as bet without the dagesh, making the V sound like vilon, meaning curtain. But it can also act as a placeholder for either the O or U sound. For instance, the word goy, meaning Gentile, uses the vav but makes the O sound. Next is zayin, which makes the Z sound. One example is ze, meaning this. Ready to practice? Alright, here we go. Ze habein means this is the sun. In case you didn't notice, it looks pretty similar to vav, but just remember that zayin zooms past the line. Now we're getting to a fun one. Next is chet, and it makes that hard KH sound that you do in the back of your throat. My personal favorite word that starts with chet is chayim, which means life. It's my favorite because that's what the rabbi calls Harold in the cartoon Hey Arnold. As you can see though, it looks almost the same as hey, but hey has a little room to breathe. Think of it this way. When people make a breathing sound, it sounds like a really dramatic sound. But when people are choking, it sounds like Next is tet, which is one of two different Hebrew letters that make the T sound. An example of a word that starts with tet is tov, meaning good. For instance, boker tov means good morning, and laila tov means good night. I can't think of any times you'll see that in the Bible, but it's at least useful to know. Next up is yud, like wood, but with a Y. As you can imagine, it makes the same sound as Y and can be used either phonetically as a consonant or a vowel. One example of a word that starts with yod is yam, which means sea, like the Red Sea. Now we're going to talk about another fun one, kaf. As you can see, it has a dagesh, and with the dagesh, it makes the K sound, like kohen, meaning priest. If you take out the dagesh though, it makes the same sound as chet. To make it even more fun, kaf is the first of 5 letters which has a final form, or a sofit. Basically, when the last letter of a word is kaf, it turns into kaf sofit, which looks like this. Just imagine you broke off the bottom and gave it a bigger back. Next one is super easy, lamed. It makes the same sound as the letter L in English. One simple word is lo, which means no. So if anyone ever asks you to sin, you tell them lo, and then you remember lamed. The next letter is mem, which makes the M sound. One word that uses M is melech, which means king. So like kaf, this letter also has a Sofit form. It looks like a curvy square, but not a circle. That's super important, which we'll get to in a minute. Now we have nun, which makes the N sound. A really important word to remember is navi, which means prophet. This letter also has a Sofit form, and it looks like this. This is not the same as vav. Vav is a straight line down, whereas nun Sofit has a gooseneck and extends a little bit further down. The next letter is samech, which makes a regular S sound. One word that starts with samech is sefer, meaning book or scroll. As you can see, this looks just like mem Sofit, except different. Remember how mem Sofit is a curvy square? Samech is a circle. Just remember, samech is a circle. Now we have ayin, which is silent just like aleph. That's it. Ayin is phonetically the exact same thing as aleph. Just remember that the word ayin is hard to pronounce, so don't pronounce anything. Next is pe, which is just as complicated as kaf. It's our final letter that's pronounced differently with a dagesh, and with the dagesh, it's pronounced with a P sound. One example is Pesach, meaning Passover. Without the dagesh, it becomes Fe, and it's pronounced with the F sound, like falafel. Now, this letter also has a Sofit form, and like the Kaf Sofit, you just break off the bottom and put it on the back. Moving right along, now we have Tzadi, which is like the combination of the letters T and S. One example is Moses' wife, whose name in Hebrew is Zipporah. That's a TS, not a Z. This letter is our final letter with a Sofit form. It kind of looks like a Nun Sofit with a second head, but in my opinion, it's a tree. Next is Kof, which makes the exact same sound as Kaf with a dagesh. One word that starts with Kof is Kodesh, which means holiness. Next is Reish, which you might think sounds like the letter R in English, but it's kind of in the back of your throat. It actually makes more like a gagging L sound. One word that starts with Reish is Ra, meaning evil. Now, real quick, let's look at Reish, Dalet, and Kaf Sofit. Dalet extends past the back line. Reish is a little bit shorter, and Kaf Sofit goes a little bit further down. This next letter has two pronunciations, but it's indicated by a dot on the top rather than a dagesh. If the dot is on the right, it's shin and pronounced with an sh sound. One example is shalom, meaning peace or hello. If the dot is on the far left, it will be sin, which is the same sound as samech. There aren't many words that start with sin, but one is sadeh, which means field. Finally, we have the last letter, tav, which is pronounced the same as the letter tet. One word that starts with tav is Torah, meaning law. Before we finish, there's a few things to know about the consonants. First are the 6 letters known as the Begad Kafat letters, which are bet, gimel, dalet, kaf, fe, and tav. There was one point where all 6 of these were pronounced differently with and without the dagesh, but don't worry, the only ones that change now are the ones that we went over already. Bet, kaf, and pe. The reason I'm bringing this up is because these will follow special rules that we'll get into later. Now, every consonant in Hebrew can have a dagesh, except the 5 consonants known as the gutturals. Aleph, he, chet, ayin, and resh. Let's review that one more time. Every consonant in Hebrew can take a dagesh except for the 5 gutturals. Aleph, he, chet, ayin, and resh. There are 6 letters, bet, gimel, dalet, kaf, fe, and tav, which are known as the Begad Kafat letters, but there are only 3 letters that change phonetically with a dagesh, and those are bet, kaf, and pe. Now, that's a lot of information, so I'm going to leave it there. One resource that I like is this Hebrew aleph-bet song, and if you can get over the unsettling animation, it's actually a really good way to remember the letters. In the next episode, we'll go over the niqqud and actually start reading words. Hit the like button if you found this useful, and don't forget that God loves you.